Welcome, welcome, welcome. Chief here. Today we're going to talk about Boberigmos Enraged and not Boberigmos, a interaction that happened that changed the rules today as we know it. For those of you who don't know, Pithy Needle, you're able to name any card. Our opponent named Boberigmos. So when it came down to it, when we wanted to use Boberigmos Enraged ability, it was allowed to because Pithy Needle was on Boberigmos. The player calls over the judge, talks him on the side, and just shares it with him. And then we find out that was it angle shooting, was it bad manners? But back in the day, about 5 years ago, rules are a lot stricter than they were. Now it changed to when you have Pith Needle, you can describe the card. And so it's more of taken within reason rather than the exact your word being bound. So if we have this clip here, we'll take a look at it, and I'll show you guys what's happening.
Top 8 on Goryo's Vengeance. Bradley Carpenter, who is in 4th place on Abs and Company, who is currently 17th on our leaderboard, is on the play for Game 2 since he did lose Game 1. And we see here Temple Garden, Pithy Needle. I imagine he's just going to name Gristlebrand and just pass the turn and say, all right, Bob, show me what you got. So it looks like Bob's going to have to win here through the combat step.
Yeah, this is going to be really tough for Bob. There's still ways that he can win, but the core engine of his deck, which is essentially drawing cards off Grizzlebrand, has now been shut off. So Bob needs to do something that's going to be a lot more fair, which is just get a creature into the graveyard, use Goryo's Vengeance to get it out, attack once, rinse and repeat. And that is something that his deck is not equipped to do.
Now, with Bradley playing Pithy Needle on Gristlebrand here, Bob's hand is 3-land, Goryo's Vengeance, Serum Visions, Through the Breach, Simian Spirit Guide, and Bulber.
His after this week, after this incident, he changed his Twitch name to Brad Boberigmos. What a feels bad.
So he does actually have an avenue of victory if he can get a Boberigmos onto the battlefield with enough lands in hand to win.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Bob can still do it, but it's a lot harder now. And I think that Bradley might even have another Pithing Needle. And if Bradley plays another Pithing Needle and names Boberigmos, things get even harder for Bob.
We call that the hard lock.
I mean, it's pretty close to it. He can still just kind of, through the breach and Goryo's Vengeance and just do normal attacks, but it really takes a lot of the power out of Bob's punch.
Now, Bob does have copies of Shatterstorm in his sideboard, so he potentially could have boarded them in. And he also has World Spine Worm, so if he's able to Through the Breach a World Spine Worm, that's pretty big.
Yeah, that is pretty big, but if it doesn't come quickly, Bradley is likely going to have
He's got 2 needles, another one in hand.
Block a little bit, buy him a little bit of time, and Bradley's going to be able to combo off at some point on his own.
It actually looks like Bradley has 2 more Pithy Needles in his sideboard, so I imagine he boarded in all 4, and he kept his hand on the power of that to stymie Bob. But if he just has a bunch of Pithy Needles in land, that could give Bob enough time to get this World Spine Worm onto the battlefield.
Yeah, typically one of the big advantages of Bob's deck is that he's sort of able to cheat his mana and have these really explosive draws. But if Bradley isn't doing anything very much and Bob is able to just develop his mana, that kind of equals the same sort of thing.
So it looks like Bradley does have a Kitchen Finks in his hand that he was able to find. So this turn he's going to cast a Birds of Paradise. He's going to use his Windswept Heath to get another land, and I imagine he's going to cast this other Pithy Needle and name either Gristlebrand so that he has a backup, or Boberigmos.
Well, after having seen the list, Bradley knows that the only way this Pithing Needle can get removed from the board is with that sideboard Shatterstorm that probably hasn't come in. So I think Bradley can feel confident that he doesn't need to have a backup Pithing Needle in play on the same card as the first one.
So Bradley's gone ahead and got a basic forest. Looks like he's going to cast this Pithing Needle. We'll get word what it's actually naming, but I'd be willing to guess that it's Boberigmos.
Yeah, and Bob just nodded his head and said, sure, whatever.
See, notice how the commentator said Boberigmos. He didn't say Boberigmos enraged. So this commentator is actually super right on the money. A little bit too on the money.
Yep, and there's the World Spine Worm that he left on top. And at this point, Bob does have a plan. He needs to get that World Spine Worm onto the battlefield, attack with it ASAP, and make a bunch of worms. And it looks like he did name Boberigmos. So we have Gristlebrand and Boberigmos named with these Pithy Needles, just like we thought was going to happen with Bradley's sideboard.
This is where he's going to the judge and being like, he named Boberigmos. He didn't name Boberigmos enraged. So he's about to angle shoot the crap out of his opponent.
Yeah, and Bob's got quite a few land drops. He's got that World Spine Worm in his hand, and if he can just get a hold of a Desperate Ritual, he could be off to the races with a lot of green creatures in play all of a sudden.
Yeah, so it looks like Bob did have a rules question away from the table. He's back. I imagine he was able to get the answer that he was looking for. And it seems that he's just going to draw and discard that Borborygmos. So it looks like next turn he's just going to Goryo's Vengeance it and attack so that he can get some damage in.
Yeah, I believe Borborygmos has a trigger that happens whenever it hits the opponent.
Yeah, you get to reveal the top 3 cards of your library.
Beautiful
and put all
old
9 cards
modern
into your hand and the rest
kitchen
into your graveyard.
finks.
Yeah, so essentially Bob is going to be looking to Goryo's Vengeance, this Borborygmos, and even though he can't use the ability where he discards a card to deal damage to his opponent, he's still going to be able to attack with the Borborygmos and then essentially use it as a source of card advantage to get more mana.
This is actually really interesting. I think Bob has enough lands in hand to where Bradley might
Yeah, he should have played his third needle on Borborygmos Enraged. That's what he should have been to save this moment.
even had been at risk of it dying had he not had that second Pithy Needle.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So here we have Bob has drawn a Faithless Looting after Bradley just gone ahead and used a Kitchen Finks. I think we're just going to see a fetch here and then a Goryo's Vengeance on this Borborygmos just to get Bradley down a little bit in life so that the World Spine Worm could potentially be a lethal attacker.
Yeah, and even though Bradley doesn't have much of an offense, Bob doesn't actually have a lot of time. With that Kitchen Finks on the table,
Guaranteed, he's going to point to his needle. He's going to point to his needle right here. Watch.
So we'll
Guaranteed.
have to see how things go here and how much time Bob actually has.
Yep, now it looks like Bob does have a Simian Spirit Guide in his hand. So really, if he happens to hit something like Desperate Ritual, he can cast that through the breach next turn.
Yeah, absolutely, and that would be big game.
So it looks like Bradley's just going to take the full 7. We're going to get a trigger off of Borborygmos, revealing 3. He's going to get 2 lands, and that Spirit Guide's going to hit the graveyard.
So not only is this a good source of
4
card
lands, that's
advantage
lethal.
for Bob having just more land drops, it's also helping to fuel his graveyard, so he potentially gets more Goryo's Vengeance targets.
Let's see here. So
Needle.
Bob did already play a land this turn.
Yep. Well, I'm sure that'll just be a quick judge call.
Right there. Point to the needle. Point to the needle.
He missed his second land drop so that he could discard the Borborygmos.
So the players will sort this out. And oh, so if Borborygmos is named with Pithing Needle, I guess that doesn't actually stop his ability because of the way that it's worded.
Yeah, well, there are multiple Borborygmos. There's the original
Oh,
one.
you know he's like the
Did he
big
name the
feel
wrong
bad.
one?
I think he might have just said Borborygmos.
Wow. Well, Bob.
Yeah, so it's
Like, it's such a huge feel bad for that to happen. So, if you don't understand what happened, he named Borborygmos. There was a card called Borborygmos, so when you needle that, it still applies to that one and not to Borborygmos Enraged. You can still name every card in Magic with Pithing Needle. So then he swings, he gets the trigger, he has 4 lands in hand, and he's like, activate. And he's trying to point, he's like, hey, I named Borborygmos with my needle. And the guy went, that's when he walked away to the judge. I assume he was checking with him and said, he said Borborygmos, confirming with him, so then I should be able to activate this. And so then he tells him that you named Borborygmos, Enraged. And so they changed the ruling how this works later on, to where you can just describe the card with it rather than having to get the specific name. And so huge freaking feels bad, but it changed the game of Magic itself. Oh, you just see it and just like him smacking the table, not madly, but just it's a big feels bad. But yeah, that's our wonderful moment for today. The Borborygmos is Borborygmos Enraged, so be sure to name correctly with needles, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.